Thank you very much for coming today to the little library here in Deming. First thing I want to do is thank the library, the Friends of the library for having this wonderful space and for allowing the members of the community to put their work up. Richard, you could easily get a show in this library, piece of cake, free, non-profit. They would love to have your work here, I know that. There are many members of this community who enjoy seeing your work here, so it's a good thing. First thing I want to say is I want to dedicate this show to Bill Snow. He's not here, and he never missed one of my shows. I could walk up to Bill at any point when I saw him or meet him or talk to him, and we didn't have to do a little chit-chat at the bottom of things or anything like that. The conversation could immediately go to a really nice, wonderful, comfortable place without yelling or screaming, or just a really nice exchange of ideas and thoughts. He's a wonderful man. To honor Bill, I want to try and recite the Eightfold Path, because he's the guy who taught everybody in his school the basic, formation of what the Eightfold Path is. And the Eightfold Path is right thought, right understanding, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. That will get you there if you just follow those things out and do that as a process of your life. So thanks, Bill. You're here, and everywhere. Next thing I want to do is read a poem. And this poem describes, if I can find it, I should have marked a page. I never do that. This poem describes what my paintings are actually kind of about, or where I try and go with them, and what the bigger picture is. And it only takes a second. It's not a long one, and it's really nice. Here it is. I used to have it totally memorized, and it's just I'm too old to keep it memorized anymore. Their beauty has more meaning. Yesterday morning enormous, the moon hung low on the ocean. Round and yellow rose in the glow of dawn. The night herons flapping home wore dawn on their wings. Today, black is the ocean, black and sulfur the sky, and white seas leap. I honestly do not know which day is more beautiful. I know that tomorrow, or next year, or in 20 years, I shall not see these things. And it does not matter. It does not hurt. They will be here. And when the whole human race has, like me, been rubbed out, they will still be here. Storms, moon, and ocean. Dawn and the birds. And I say this, their beauty has more meaning than the whole human race and the race of birds. That's Robinson Jeffers. I keep that book around me a lot. Times are tight. So the point of my work is to celebrate what Robinson Jeffers said about that little poem. It's the sublime. It's the beauty beyond whatever we can touch and find and get to in almost any other way. And sometimes art can get you there, and sometimes it can't, and sometimes it does other things. Sometimes it's nature. For me, mostly it's going for a walk. I just have to walk out the door, especially where I live in the woods, and there's nature, and it becomes sublime almost immediately. Right now there's a heron that's hanging out by the bridge down across where the swamp hits, and it's a beautiful, sublime thing to see. It's a big, frightening kind of bird, flies away in big wings. Celebrate the timelessness. That's what this Australian practice, this painting is trying to get to a sense of no time. I don't want to deal with time anymore. I keep Bill alive in me, and I talk to him all the time because he's still here. He's still right here. And so that's a timeless thing. I have a friend, Keith. Every time I have a mechanical problem, Keith could fix anything. He's right there, and it's a timeless sense of existence. Everything I know about is compressed into this instant, yet it's expanded forever. So it's timeless. And I also try and get that focus into the work. I want to have the timeless kind of thing work. The purpose of the work, they're all prayer paintings. When I was a little kid, I didn't do so darn well in college in terms of what the standard rigmarole was for getting your art degree and stuff like that. I had a hard time in my watercolor class, and I had to take some sneaky units from a professor who kind of liked me and took me under his wing so I could get enough units to get out of there before the military got me. And so I just never got into the selling paintings or the gallery thing at all. Just never headed in that direction. And I was reading these Tibetan books and doing this other stuff, and I just ended up in a different place. Boom. And so what came out over the years was these different kinds of work. And the purpose of the paintings is just simple prayers and to illustrate the sublime, or somehow bring people to think about what the sublime might be in nature. So my reading list is what I kind of wanted to focus on because I'm in a library. And the first book, and I'll go quick with these, is Man of Everest, the autobiography of Tenzing, told to James Ramsey Ullman. And it was the counter to Hillary's book at the time, where the British conquered the mountain. And this guy went up as a Buddhist and helped Hillary all the way up the thing, getting his shoes on in the last camp and all this kind of stuff to get it up there. And they didn't have a lot of fancy clothes or anything like that. It was really tough. They had nailed boots. They put nails through their shoes and get to the top. It's an astonishing story. I read this. It was the first book I read as a kid that was an adult book. I checked it out of my library, the Glendora Public Library. And there it was in my hot hands, and I read it. And it was a struggle. It's got some big words in it, and I had to look on a map to find out where Calcutta was and stuff like that. So it was a really good book for a kid to read. That also is written from a Buddhist point of view. Tenzing was a profound Sherpa Buddhist, and he had a lot to say about that on the way up.
What year, Ken, was that?
That's 1955. Yep. They made the mountain in 53 and took 2 years to get the books out back in those days. If we had nowadays, it would be out in no time. Next little book is my college. Gary Snyder was writing this little puppy when I was going to college, and it came out in the 70s, but we all knew who he was, and this was all going on, and this is just a wonderful little Pulitzer Prize winning book of poetry. And Gary Snyder was a Zen guy. He went and studied Chinese stuff, and he went and studied Japanese stuff and lived in those places. And he brought that to his work, and he was a beatnik, and he was a character in Kerouac's books. And so we knew about him, and we knew about what was going on with that. And that was a big influence. It's just a little hippie running around with influence. And it's very important. And of course, in the process of doing that, this is one of my older copies of Walden. I have like 4 copies at home. This one's just totally marked up and got, all kinds of torn ears and stuff. I've read this book at least 7 or 8 times. I used it as a teaching tool in my high school classroom on a regular basis. It's really the foundation of understanding Gandhi and Martin Luther King and virtually everybody else. It's about transcendentalism. And the focus of my work is transcendent. I want to move you from here to someplace else, and it's done symbolically. And that's kind of an interesting way to go. That came about at a different time. Another book that happened during my college days, or just after that, was a book by Heinrich Harrar, and this is 7 Years in Tibet. And that really piqued my interest in Buddhism a lot, because Heinrich Harrar was a German, and he was trapped in India during the war, World War II, and so he had to escape. So he and a buddy climbed over the Himalayas and escaped into Tibet. And he became really good friends with the Dalai Lama. And for years and years, they were buddies and hung out. And the Dalai Lama picked these 2 German engineers' brains about all kinds of stuff in the world, and got a movie projector up there and all kinds of other things. And it was a big deal. It's a wonderful story, a human story about Tibet. And it tells you a lot about it. It's really a cool story. The best book about Tibet ever is this book called Tibet. It's by Colin Turnbull and Thubten Norbu. And Thubten Norbu is the Dalai Lama's older brother. And this book is about the province of Amdo, essentially, and how Buddhism really was before the war and what was really going on. Amdo Monastery was the largest monastery in the world. They had more monks in the Amdo Monastery than all of Tibet combined and a lot of other places. It's a huge Chinese Chan Buddhist, monastery, in doing all the traditional things that we know about in Tibet and normally do that. And the Chinese government smashed that during the war, and the Japanese government smashed that during the war. So Thupten escaped. And he told his brother, then, who was becoming the Dalai Lama, that you have to get out. That's bad news. And that ultimately led to it. Thupten ended up retired, or not retired, but living at the University of Indiana, which has a really wonderful Buddhist, school and studies program. He truly was more important and kind of a bigger guy than the Dalai Lama, because like I said, Tibet was really kind of small out there, and all the monks and all the traditions were in Amdo when they got destroyed, and that was before the war. And this book is a wonderful, very honest treatise about what life was like and what the religion was like and what was going on with it and stuff like that. Just really piques your curiosity and interest about things like that. I don't have here a copy of, but the next book is Stephen Batchelor, Buddhism Without Beliefs. And that's an unbelievably important book, because who wants to get stuck up in a mucky religion? And the Buddhists are as good as anybody about mucking things up. They can make you believe all sorts of things that you don't necessarily want to believe at any one particular time, and make you do some dances. And there's enormous Buddhist materialism in America. If you don't have your singing bowl, your little this and your little that, you're not an official Buddhist or anything like that, well, please forgive me. Buddhism Without Beliefs says that you kind of have to pay attention to the Eightfold Path, that there's three basic things that you have to do. You have to serve your community, you have to support your family, and you have to make yourself grow. And that's about it. Francis has a wonderful one on the wall the other day at his place. He showed me meander, be curious, pay attention, seek grace.
Le flâneur.
What?
Le flâneur. It's a French word, flâneur. That's my mantra there.
It's a wonderful little saying and passage, and I've used it many times and repeated it several times, Francis, so thank you very much. It's a good way to go. The next little book is a totally fun book. This is Magic and Mystery in Tibet. There's a woman named Madame Blavatsky and the Theosophical Society. And Madame Blavatsky lived from 1831 to 1891, and Alexander David Neal is a little clone who did her work in the 20s and 30s instead of in the 1880s. And the basic story is these women back in the days were like kind of the men. There were a whole bunch of explorers all going all over the world, looking in the Peruvian area and looking in Northern California for Indian things and digging out stuff. And they're mostly Germans and French and English, adventurers. Theodore Roosevelt ended up floating down a river in the Amazon. You're like, what's this all about? So Madame Blavatsky snuck into Tibet, 1880. It's really pretty hard to get in. They kicked her out the first time, and she, went in as a man. Oh, yeah, just I'll be a man. I won't say anything. Let's walk in. And she got in, and she spent a bunch of years there and learned some stuff and came back out. And she came back and wrote a book, Isis Revealed. And it was all about the mystic and other kinds of things. And she claimed she could do these things now because she'd been trained by adepts, and it was very secret stuff. And so they formed all these little clubs, and it totally piqued the interest of the artists. And they formed this thing called the Theosophical Society. And it was designed to promote universal brotherhood of humanity, to promote the study of comparative religions and philosophies, and to make a systematic study of mystic potential. And Kandinsky and Mondrian and Matisse and Gauguin and all these guys went to seances and meetings in Paris and hung out with this stuff, and it became a pretty big deal. When it got to America and Blavatsky died, it split into a different kind of thing over here, and is to this day, the Theosophical Society still exists. It's Old Publishing is what it's called. This book is a hoot. She has anecdotes about Buddhist jokes, about melting frozen coats off your back with your body heat at 11,000 or 14,000 feet, about causing fire to happen and running amazing distances, and there's all kinds of reasons and things, and who knows if it's all true, but it's really a great read, and it really sort of sets your psyche for about what you're supposed to sort of feel and see about this like kind of Buddhist stuff. So that brings me to the Theosophical Society and the artists who were influenced by it. I mentioned two of them, Kandinsky and Mondrian. And those guys are really important. And I have three short Kandinsky stories just to talk about abstraction. Kandinsky was a member of a large number of people who did abstraction. That was a thing going on all over the place. And he's often credited as being the first, but he certainly wasn't that. Abstraction's been going on since the beginning of man, really. But the first to take it apart. And they figured out that abstraction had to do a couple of things. It had to have purpose, and it had to have empathy. Those were the two kind of things that sort of go on. You want somebody to feel something one way or another, or do something inside themselves, and you want to have it be purposeful work of some sort or another. Up until then, work had always been kind of realistic, based on nature and stuff like that, but it was the Renaissance idea that was carried clear through to the Impressionists. So here's the first Kandinsky story. He's going into a gallery, and a lot of people there, and he goes in the back door of the gallery, and he's looking around, and his paintings are just astonishing. He hasn't, been in the show. He doesn't know whose show it is. He doesn't read the titles or anything like that. These are abstract paintings, and he's looking at them in close and stuff like that. And he finally steps back and he reads the title, and they're called Haystacks. And he says he lost it right there. They became haystacks immediately, and the abstraction and the beauty went away. Be careful what you call your paintings, and pay attention to what abstraction kind of really is. The next story is he was at the same little gallery place. And there was a studio there, and he went into town. He was working on a painting, and he went into town for his dinner, and he went down to have his dinner, and he came back, and it was dark, and the moonlight was shining on this painting that had been his, but it wasn't his. It was this fantastic, unbelievable painting, and he couldn't figure it out. And it turned out that somebody in the meantime had turned his painting upside down. And when he turned it upside down, the abstraction became really obvious and really intense and really clear. And he went, oh. The third thing that happened to him was he went to the opera, and he didn't understand the words, and he was trying to get a hold of what the opera was sounding about, so he closed his eyes, and what he saw was colors. He had synesthesia, which is a mental, paranormal kind of thing that happens in your head where you perceive sound as color. What a joy that must have been to go through life. Right now, though, these days, I don't know, a rat might knock you flat. Pretty hard to figure those colors out, pretty sharp. So, those are Kandinsky stories, and I use him a lot, the understanding of abstraction. One last thing, he held up a Rousseau and said, I don't mind realism. As long as it's effective and really good realism, like Henri Rousseau painted realistic things. There were things and definite things going on, but they were totally in harmony and beauty and wonder with nature. So that was really a wonderful thing to be. And Mondrian, of course, is, you see a lot of the influence of that in my work. It's just a reduction of what landscapes are about. And he was deeply, profoundly moved in many spiritual ways. He was a religious guy, and he wrote extensively about his spiritual perceptions of his own work and stuff like that. His work is all over the world, and you see it everywhere. If anybody watches the Rachel Maddow show or MSNBC, the sets in the background are kind of Mondrian-esque. There's, reds and blues, and there's no yellows. They didn't use that in the other things, but they're very much reminiscent of his designs and stuff, and they're all over in houses and buildings and places like that. It's very common. The last guy I want to get to, actually, there's two more to go. I'll do the Australian Aboriginal book. Jody and I went down to a Australian Aboriginal show at the Seattle Art Museum and picked up this book and another folio that was much larger of the work. And I read this one cover to cover twice now. It has incredible Australian Aboriginal work in it, and it's probably the coolest artwork in the world, along with the Salish people who are doing really cool indigenous artwork right now. There's several groups of Aboriginal or semi-reasonably Aboriginals who are left on the face of the earth, going back and holding onto the roots and doing beautiful things. This stuff, the timelessness, the song lines, the creation deities, all the things are just so harmonic with what the planet is kind of all about, which brings me to the last guy here, which is Paul Shepard. My friend Tom gave me this book. He's the guy who turned me on to Paul Shepard, and what a gift that was. Paul Shepard is a professor emeritus who's now dead of human ecology, and he's a behaviorist at heart and looks at us as animals. And it turns out that, we all wake up in the morning and we kind of look around for a bathroom, and then we kind of scratch ourselves in a few places, and then we eat some sort of breakfast thing. Almost all people do that somewhere. And then there's other things that happen during the day. And the differences between almost anybody on the face of the earth is minimal, really, in the terms of the things you actually do from moment to moment to moment. So what's with all this war, and what's with all this, what's going on? And we all evolved in relationship to what the planet was about. And this book sets up and defines what that involvement with the planet actually was before we got to the point of domestication of plants and animals, which just ruined it. And I have to tell you, it's the fault of the artist. There are at least 3 of us in this room who can take credit for wrecking the world. The buildings at Göbekli Tepe, the ruins in southern Turkey, are the first places they found domesticated animals and domesticated wheat. And it was a bunch of artists getting together to build themselves a temple because they couldn't get into the caves anymore. They've been painting in caves, and all the caves were painted in and stuff. And so they made their own cave. They dug into the ground, they carved these really cool pillars and things, they wove a big basket of logs and stuff over the top, they covered it with dirt, they took torches in, and they had these celebrations. Well, it took so long to do that, and it took so many people to do that, that they ate up and killed all the animals locally. And so, these goats are easy to keep, man. So let's keep some goats, okay? You, stupid! And he always picked the dumbest guy to take care of the goats. It's a long tradition. It's changed lately, though, because the goat herders, the best goat herders, are not done. They're really smart, cool people. So over in Iran, they have tremendously cool, smart goat herders who get goats to places that you can't even imagine. So the goat thing got really big right away and went worldwide. And the same thing happened with the wheat thing and the figuring out, we can grow these things over and over again in repetition. And pretty soon we had civilizations in which men were dogs and women were less than dogs. And there were conquerors running around and wars taking place. And life suddenly got shorter and meaner and crueler. And here we are now in these wonderful days. And the reason I'm painting my paintings is to try and bring the notion not the dogs back. I want the natural world to be celebrated in the best possible way you can, whenever you can, however you can. And just walking out in it anywhere and realizing that you can look down at the leaf on the ground and be just as good as you want is important. And the last little thing I want to say is just a little mention of the tractor god and the raccoons. All religions have one thing in common, it's all have tractors. Every one of them. Buddhists have tractors, Catholics have tractors, Presbyterians have tractors, Hindus have tractors. Australian Aboriginals really think tractors are pretty cool these days. They'll go out and run over a kangaroo with a tractor because it's much easier to try to chase one down. I don't care. They need a kangaroo. They all have tractors. And the world is covered with tractors. And it used to be horses and plows and things, and pretty soon they became machines. In 1947, the Lord Gizmo arose, and he was the computer god. And now, on the plains of Nebraska, there are big areas in which there are not even human beings. There's just tractors with brains in them, these electronic artificial intelligences, leveling the land and planting the crops. And you can already get a French fry at McDonald's that has never touched human hands. So that's my little... The natural enemies, I didn't tell you about the enemies. The enemies of the tractor god, and you can see these guys dead on the street all the time, are the raccoons and the possums and those guys, because they just prey on us. They don't care kind of what we do. They're really wild. They're omnivores just like we're omnivores. They've taken complete advantage. There's massive numbers of raccoons in the large cities. doing not damage really, because they're too sly to do damage. They're just sort of existing alongside of us and we don't know they're there. They find them on the 18th floors of high-rises, living with their families. Toronto, New York are famous for this. Dogs disappear in Seattle because raccoons are hungry. And there you go. Crows and ravens are also their natural, helpers and stuff like this. So when you see those guys out there, think about the natural world and stuff like that, because they're fighting back. They're able to live off of us. They're omnivores like we are, and they're probably going to be the longest lasting kind of creatures that we have. And I don't have any more work to say about anything right now. Does anybody have any questions about anything? And there you go. Thank you. Thank you.
Now, what you've been telling us about what influenced you, this body of work is the result of years of being a Buddhist, being in nature.
I think it's more the actual answer I would give you is kind of the Tao. It's just more following along, and the Buddhist stuff is just a framework to hang things on. The Dharma is the fundamental understanding of the physical and moral universe. And you never get to learn the whole thing. The Buddhist teachings are how to be in harmony with that fundamental law. And so it's kind of just there all the time. You pick up little pieces and you try and move along the little path. And the actual process is more like a Zen Taoist process, kind of a combination of that, where these little things happen, you go, oh, I get it, and you make little jumps. I'll do the next painting this way, and that'll further this idea a little bit. And you're doing that one for a long time, because it takes a long time to do it, and then pretty soon you have an idea along the way, you go, oh, this idea here,
Do you hope people will see the piece and reflect off of it? Off of what your thoughts were?
I hope. I don't paint for a large audience.
It's not about a large audience. Is that every mountain needs another mountain to reflect off of. You want somebody to see it. Whether they say it's good or bad is not the point.
Yeah, no,
it's a feeling.
I want empathy of some kind or another for some sort of sensibility, of some kind. I'm not sure what the empathy is going to be.
It's not about sales, obviously. That's not what drives you. You spend a lot of time, effort, and money into getting the pieces framed and so forth. They're treasures to you.
The truth of the matter is about framing them. And
you make the frames.
I make the frames, and I cut the mats, and I go buy the glass, and I put it on there, and I do it for a reason. The reason is, if I make the frames fancy enough, people will think, oh, there's something there by the frame. It's the American materialistic understanding. And if I can get them just to not throw them out right away and have them look at it for more than one day, I have a shot.
Sure. Then people stand in front of a painting you busted your butt on for months, they go, nice frame, and walk on.
That happens a lot.
Up to every artist.
Yeah.
You can't take it personal.
I don't take it personally.
No,
I just want to make sure they have nice ones on, because it's like being able to talk about sports with Trump fans. And so there you go. You have something to say. And you can...
So you said you want your work to be transformative. And I find that you have to look at a bunch of them, to get somewhere. Each one tells you this much, but then it starts to grow and resonate. Like, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and there's also, Francis knows about this, is the syntax of the time in which you're in and what you were painting at that time. And you can see the work transform itself. Almost any artist's work will transform itself over a period of time and do different things. It's why it's sort of important to hang on to some pieces anyway, to keep, information inside. The most effective way for me, I think, for my work to